Hi, thank you so much for joining me. And today we're going to be looking at week 2 of our series Focus. And so last week we saw that we are worshipers. God created us to worship, and we are constantly worshiping. There's never a time we're not. And so the question is not if we're worshiping, but who or what are we worshiping? And so this week we're in Exodus 32, and the children of Israel are at Mount Sinai. Moses has gone up on top of Mount Sinai to meet with the Lord, where he's receiving the covenant and the 10 Commandments and some laws from the Lord. And during this time, the children of Israel stop looking up and look down. And because of that, they get out of focus. They begin to focus on something other than God and put something between them and God, and that is an idol. And so anything we put in between us and God is an idol. And what we see in Exodus 32 is the effects that it has both on Israel and the relationship with God and how God views our idolatry. So in Exodus 32, starting in verse 1, they go and they tell Aaron this, Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. And so the Israelites are at the mountain. They tell Aaron, make us a god that can go between us and the Lord. And so can be the mediator. Notice they're not replacing the Lord with this idol. They're replacing Moses. And so they're still trying to worship God, but now they're doing it their own way. They're putting their own little twist on it. And what we see is any deviation from God's commands, from what He has for us, will ultimately lead us and separate us from God and lead us away from God into idolatry. And so they ask Aaron to make them this idol. Aaron forms this golden calf from the jewelry that they give him, and then it says this is what they do. On verse 6, it says, they rose up early on the next day and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And this is a feast to the Lord. This is something they're trying to worship the Lord. They're like, I still am worshiping you, God. I'm worshiping you. And they present these burnt offerings for their sins and then these peace offerings, showing that, hey, what we're doing is God's pleased with us. God wants us to worship this way. But notice what it says next. They rose up to play. And that word play has the sexual sin. And so they committed sexual sins together and started satisfying their lustful desires with one another. And you would look at that and be like, what? Like, why would anybody worship God like that or think God would want them to worship like that? And God never said that in the 10 Commandments. He never said to do that in His law. Why would they want to do that? And in Romans 1, we get a little hint about why we worship idols the way we do. And it says that we exchange the glory of the Creator in Romans 1 for things that are created, things that we can see and touch, and whether that's ourselves, whether that's an animal, whether that's any planets or galaxies, or just our dreams of success and fame or money or whatever. We insert all these things between us and God. And so often, just like this golden calf came in just in between Israel and God, and it came in subtly. It snuck in, and they weren't denying God. They were saying, no, God, we're still worshiping you. We're just putting this in. So many times, our idols are simply, we can still claim to be Christians. We can still claim to worship God and be doing this for God, and yet there's something separating us and God. And that is an idol, whether it's your phone, whether it's work or schoolwork, or whether it's your good grades or success or the good things you do, or whether it's like, I want to live however I want. And Romans 1 describes that when we do that we give into the passionate, lustful desires of our heart, that we try to fulfill our desires of our sinful desires through these idols that we set up. And because God's not satisfying our heart's desires, we say this idol should. And so we try to satisfy ourselves that way. Inevitably, it leads us to being enslaved to our own sinful desires. This will lead you, idolatry will lead you to being separated from God and enslaved to your own sinful desires. And that's what we see here with Israel. So how does God respond to idolatry? We see back up on the mountain in Exodus 32 that God is angry. God is so angry, he tells Moses, stand back, I'm going to destroy them with fire, and I'm going to start over with you and make you into a great nation. And it's at this point that we see the heart of a true worshiper, Moses. Because idolatry and the heart of an idolater, or for many of us, is to say, I want to be great, I want to be wise, I want to be God. And it's so much about its focus on the self being great and the self being the position of God. But Moses here, when God tells him, I'm going to make you into a great nation, let me destroy them, we see that Moses begins to intercede and asking God to forgive his people. And he does so by telling God and reminding God of who he is. And he says, the other nations would think that you're just like their gods, that you're this out of control God who's just swayed by emotion. And when you get angry, you're going to destroy these people. But you're not that kind of God. You're a God who is faithful to keep your promise, just the promise that you made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Stand by your word, and God relents and forgives these people. This wasn't so much of Moses changing God as it was seeing Moses' heart that he did not want to be great, but he wanted God to be great. He was concerned about God's greatness, and that's the heart of a worshiper. What kind of heart do you have? What idols are separating you from God? You might still say, oh, I'm a Christian, I'm living for God, I'm reading my Bible, I'm going to church. Great. But you can still have an idol in between you and God, whether that's your phone or things you're looking at on the internet, how you're spending your time, your hobbies, the time you spend with your family and the position they have in your life, your work, success, money, any of these things could get in the place between you and God. And when they do, they separate you from God, and they are worthy of God's judgment. But God is faithful, and he forgives. So expose your idols, confess these idols to God, and let him destroy them from your heart and life. And as he does, you will begin to worship him and desire his greatness above your own. Well, I hope this was encouragement to you. Have a good day. Bye.